Going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Fed Up Church. I'm Pastor Sean Finney, and this week we're going into Ecclesiastes Chapter 7. Now, you have to remember, Ecclesiastes means preacher, and it was written by Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, also king of Israel, and we're going to see a lot of interesting things that come out of this chapter that we've been building up to for the first 6 chapters over the past few weeks. Now, I'll be reading today from the New International Version, from this handy-dandy little book that I got at the local bookstore that has the Message and NIV together. So read from whatever Bible you're comfortable using. It doesn't really matter which Bible version you use as much as you reading it. Because I can guarantee you what you're hearing coming out of most pulpits today, yeah, you'd be able to refute if you were actually reading this book yourself, because somebody definitely hasn't been. So let's dig in this week and we'll find out, why do we suffer? What's the point of a bad day? And what's the value in a reputation? Stick with us as we dig into it. Let's roll. Alright guys, let's go ahead and pick up in verse 1 of chapter 7. Solomon says, "A good name is better than fine perfume, and the day of death better than the day of birth." Your funeral's better than your birthday.
Can't you see what the hell is wrong with you people? The coffin's moving. Just need to show you he's alive. Look.
Interesting. I find it very interesting. He says a good name is better than fine perfume. Because we have to remember what a good name meant, especially culturally in this time period. But what did they use perfume for? So covering up odors, I mean, they didn't have the same facilities we have today, right? So showering and things like that's not going to happen every single day. They're covering up a lot of odors with perfume. So masking the nasty with good smellies, okay? That's the point. Now, he says a good name is better than fine perfume. Perfume that's very effective, a good mask to your odor, to what disgusts people about you in those moments, right? A good name is better than that. A reputation, specifically. And this is coming from Solomon. Now, Solomon's king of Israel. Wisest man who ever lived. God literally gave him the gift of wisdom, right? Which, now, it doesn't mean he knows everything. He doesn't know everything. But wisdom is the application of knowledge, right? So he can retain information, and he can discern between right and wrong, good and evil, to better lead God's people. That's what he asked for. And God's answer to that request was wisdom. Now, Solomon is the son of David. Yeah, that David. So for Solomon to say a good name is better than fine perfume, I mean, the guy's got a great name. He's literally the son of David, King David. So why is he worried about his name? And why would you then go on to say that the day of death is better than the day of birth? So interesting thing to keep in mind here. Solomon started off strong, right? On your birthday, the day that you're born, all you have to you is your name. That's all he had. That's all he entered this world with, is the name of who his father was, David, right? And that comes with power and authority, because that's literally how the world works. But it's nothing but potential beyond that point. You know, the child hasn't messed up anything in life, hasn't sinned, hasn't seen any of the egregious errors under the sun, the way people are treated, the oppression, the brutality. He hasn't had to deal with any of the ugly that happens under the sun. So you would think that the day of someone's birth would be much better, right? Because it's nothing but potential. But Solomon says it's the day that you die that matters more, because at that point, if you think about it, you know who that man was. You know who that person was, because they have completed the journey. They have fulfilled their entire lifespan. They've lived their life. And it's no longer about potential. It's about result. And the actual results tell the tale of who you were, how you treated people while you were here. So what Solomon is saying is that how you end the story, the name that you leave behind in other people's perspectives, matters more than the name you're born with, the name you enter into this world with. Interestingly enough, Solomon started off strong. right? When he was young, David taught him like 3 things that you must obey if you're going to be the king of Israel. Don't have multiple wives. Don't amass silver and gold. What was the third one? Don't marry foreign wives. That's the third one. So, obey your God, follow his commandments, and you'll be able to rule Israel well. Now, Solomon did, right? Now, and Solomon asked God for that gift of wisdom so that he could discern between right and wrong, good and evil, and be able to better lead his people. And God granted him that. God granted him that through wisdom. The problem is that from that point forward, he tried finding meaning to life and purpose and understanding and everything else but God. So as he were going through towards the end of his life, he's writing this book, Ecclesiastes, preacher, teaching an assembly of people. And he is saying that it's how you end that matters, because he didn't end well. He literally broke every single one of those commandments that David had told him to make sure you follow. He tried to amass silver and gold, and he did it successfully very well. He married many foreign wives, and many, multiple, 700 wives, 300 concubines, and put them all in a harem. So this guy has tried doing it his way through everything under the sun. And he found it all to be meaningless. And it's all vain, and it's empty, and it's worthless. And that's what he's kind of made it to the end. And if anything, he's looking back, trying to teach us. What can we learn from this? What can we learn from his experiences, and as varied and as many as they were? So he's saying in verse 2, it's better to go to a house of mourning than go to a house of feasting. Again, on the full funeral vibe, right? If we're going to go to a wake, it's better to go to the funeral house than it is to go to your, a party. Why? How on earth could that be better? I don't know anyone who would be like, you want to go to the party Friday night? No, I'd rather go to a funeral. But Solomon's saying that's actually better for you. It would actually be better. And he'll get into detailing why here in just a couple of verses. And he says, for death is the destiny of every man. Well, I guess not a couple of verses. It's literally the next line. Death is the destiny of every man. So why would it be better to go to a house of mourning? If you're going to go there anyway when you die, what's the point of going before you die? He said, the living should take this to heart. That makes sense. The living should take it to heart. So they should go and see. Go and literally see what's in front of you. The mourning, the sorrow, the pain, the anguish of death, the finality of death, and how frail we all are. Because nobody really thinks that they're going to die. Like, we all know we're going to, right? But nobody's like, today's the day. Nobody expects that to happen. Nobody expects it to be this week or even this year. But it happens. It happens to everybody. So the problem with it is that we don't recognize it. We think it's going to be so far off. And that may or may not be the case. So Solomon's saying it's better for the living to go to the house of mourning better than it is for them to go to a party. Because if you go to a place where people are mourning, it's going to smack you right in the face. The finality of life. It's not infinite. It's not going to last forever. And one day you are going to die. And when that day happens, what are you going to do? What's going to be the name that you left behind? In verse 3, he says, sorrow is better than laughter. I don't know anyone who would say that. I'd rather laugh any day than just be sad. You have depression and comedy. Choose. And sometimes they're the same. And not in a good way. But if you're going to choose, most people are like, I'd rather watch like a comedy film versus let me watch some sad, sappy, boring, boo-hoo kind of movie, right? We always will gravitate towards what makes us happy, that comedy side of things. So Solomon's saying, yeah, that's not good either. It's better for you to actually experience the sorrow and the pain. Because again, that brings you to a position where you're asking questions now. I mean, if you think about it, if you're laughing, having a good time with your friends, and you guys are just joking, laughing, having a great time, nobody's asking any good questions. Nobody's really digging deep into matters of the heart, things that actually matter. So, yeah, in that case, Solomon's right. If you're going to ask those questions, especially when it comes to your own mortality and what happens after you die, the only way people get to that point of asking those questions is if they're in a position where it's staring them in the face and they're thinking that could be me. He says, sorrow is better than laughter because a sad face is good for the heart. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of pleasure. Fools don't ask many questions. So their heart's going to be in the house of pleasure with laughter and fun. Live every day to its fullest. But Solomon's saying the wise man's heart is in the house of mourning, because that's the only place you're going to learn. It's the only place you're going to grow is when you're put into a position where you now have to ask yourself questions. It says in verse 5, it is better to heed a wise man's rebuke than to listen to the song of fools. I also find it funny that Solomon wrote a book called Song of Solomon, and he's saying it's better to listen to the rebuke of a wise man than the song of fools. He was very, at least he was very enlightened on, his own viewpoint as far as kind of humble. He didn't really have this issue of like too much pride, but he said it's better to listen to a wise man's rebuke or a wise man's correction, right? And we don't like to do that. Nobody really likes to do that. I struggled with this immensely. I got a position when I was first being trained as a manager with the company I work at, and we were told we're going to have weekly one-on-ones with our managers. Okay, great. That's awesome. I've been performing well up to this point. Everything's great. Sure. We'll have a weekly meeting. The first week, I felt like I was getting slapped around nonstop. It's like, well, you need to do this, change this, do this right. A constant rebuke. Second week was no different. Third week was no different. Fourth week, I'm thinking I'm going to get fired. And I have that conversation like, look, maybe I'm just really bad at this. Oh, no, you're doing a great job. Have you been in these meetings? Like, you're ripping me apart. You're ripping me to shreds here. And then you turn around and say I'm doing a great job. Like, I don't get it. And well, no, that's the purpose of feedback, right? That's the purpose and the value of a mentor, to have somebody who's been through it before. I can coach you into avoiding problems, right? Because the value of a mentor is that's somebody who's already experienced the pain of a problem you're about to create. Like, okay. And I went, so this is going to continue the entire time you're in the training program, which lasted a year, weekly, just getting ripped to shreds. I found myself within 3 or 4 months looking forward to these meetings, because it would be a conversation of, okay, is the last thing still an issue? No. Okay, fantastic. What do you got for me? Give it to me. And okay, work on this, fix this, do this. Okay, great. And then that would give me fuel to go for another week. After I got out of that program, and I'm just a regular manager at this point, it's not like that, right? The whole process was completely different. I'd have a weekly one-on-one with my new manager outside of the training program. How are things going? And she's like, great. I got no complaints. I'm like, okay, fantastic. What do you got for me? I got nothing. What are you talking about? Okay, yeah. Well, you did this, great. And this, I was like, I don't need the positive stuff. I don't need that. Yeah, okay, I think I'm doing a good job too. So I don't need you to like reaffirm that right now. I need you to give me the hard stuff. Give me the good stuff. Give me what I need to fix and improve to get better. Like, lay it on me. I can take it. And they just freak out when you start doing that. So, but I had grown accustomed to getting wise counsel, the rebuke of a wise man, right? Versus the song of fools, because that doesn't help you improve. It doesn't help you grow. And the only way to get better is to know what you can do better. And a lot of people don't want to listen to that. A lot of people don't want to hear what they're doing wrong or where they could improve, because again, it sounds like rebuke. It sounds like correction. Well, it is, but it's for your benefit. So you get better because of it. It's not to just simply insult and ridicule you to tear you down. It's literally to give you a means to build back stronger. So Solomon hit it on the head when he said that it is better to heed a wise man's rebuke than to listen to the song of fools. Because I've seen people sing praises of other people all day long, nonstop, and turn around and fire them. So where'd they go wrong? Like, this is a conversation that you should have had. This is what Solomon is saying. Like, if somebody's willing to rebuke you, don't immediately get defensive. They're taking a step out on a limb to help you grow. So don't just immediately discount it and say, they just don't like me, I'm done with them. That doesn't help. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help them. It doesn't help anyone. And they'll get to a point where they stop giving you counsel and advice. And that's dangerous if they are wiser than you. Right? If you want to grow and get better at whatever it is, surround yourself with wise counsel. He compares it in verse 6, the Song of Fools. He compares it, it says, like the crackling of thorns under the pot, so is the laughter of fools. This too is meaningless. The crackling of thorns. If you've ever had a campfire, the best way to actually figure out like what he's trying to say here, we don't really have thorns, right? We got pine needles and stuff like that around. If you were to put that kind of stuff in a fire and try and cook on it, I mean, yeah, they're going to pop. They're going to make a lot of noise. They're flashy. They burn bright and fast. But they don't produce any kind of sustainable heat to actually cook anything. You're not actually going to make any progress if all you're doing is throwing a whole bunch of flashy pine needles on a campfire. It's just going to be annoying after a while. And this is what Solomon is saying. The laughter of fools is like thorns under a pot, right? They're crackling, they're making lots of noise. They're bright and flashy, but they're not actually cooking what's in the pot. They're not actually producing anything, and it's not progressing along.
You must unlearn what you have learned.
This is like hot coals, right? They're painful. They burn a little bit when you have to get hit with them, but it'll actually produce something in you, and it'll actually help you grow. It'll actually cook something that will be desirable later on. In verse 7, he said, extortion turns a wise man into a fool, and a bribe corrupts the heart. So once you make it to that point of being a wise man, and typically in life, wise men are who we put in positions of power and authority, or they earn their way into that position, or they're elected in. And he cautions us, when you get to that point, be careful, because extortion can turn you back into a fool. A bribe, well, that'll corrupt your heart. Because that's what you're now at a risk for extortion and bribery, because you're in a position of power and influence. This comes with the territory. You have to be on guard for that. No quid pro quo. We're not doing that here. This doesn't work. No bribes. Focus on maintaining the intent that you started with, even after you've quote unquote made it, because I say quote unquote because you never really do. You never really make it. You're always going to be learning and growing. And if you're not, you're dead. So constantly strive to learn. He says in verse 8, the end of a matter is better than its beginning, and patience is better than pride. The end of a matter is better than the beginning. Again, this comes back to like the day of death is better than the day of birth. Why? Because now it's no longer just what you're seeing as potential. Now you actually have the results. Now you can go back and see what actually manifested from the whole thing. Was it worth it? Did it end the way you thought it would end? Because it takes many twists and turns to get to the end of a matter. And he's saying the end of the matter is better than its beginning. At the conclusion of something, at the end of a matter, not only have you reached the destination, the end goal, whatever it is, you're no longer the same person who started on that journey. You don't reach your goal, your destination. Say your goal is to, I want to make $1 million by the time I'm 30. That was my goal. I'm 34. Got $1 million. Nope, nowhere close. But if that's the goal, and you make it. Fantastic. You made it. But the problem is you're no longer the same person who started. So the person that you were in the beginning, why you originally wanted that $1 million, is going to be entirely different when you get it, because the learning and the growth and the process that you go through to get to a point where you attain that, you're no longer the same person. You're going to have different dreams and goals and ideas for now what you can do with that. So the end of the matter is better than its beginning, because you're better at the end of it than you were in the beginning. Solomon says patience is better than pride. And I found that interesting. So, like, I never considered patience like the antithesis of pride or its opposite. But if you think about that, that does make sense, right? If you think, like, where's the majority of impatience come from? Pretty much a source of pride. Like, you're standing in line waiting at, the grocery store, and you're getting sick and tired of waiting because they're taking forever. And why are you getting impatient? Well, I got places to go and things to do, and I'm too busy for this. My time's too valuable. That's a place of pride. Versus patience coming from a position of humility of, well, I've been on the other end of that too. I can see they're going through some struggles with the cash register or whatever they're doing there, and technology's failing them, and they're rebooting systems or whatever it is. Yeah, I've been there too. That's a position of humility, and that humility is what drives patience. A lack of patience is a sign of pride. And Solomon's saying, no, patience is better than pride. And then he goes on and he says in the next verse, do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the lap of fools. Other translations will say, like, in the bosom of fools, right? And like the heart of fools. Don't be quick to fly off the handle. When you let patience or impatience get the best of you, pride, he says, don't be so quick to get angry. Don't let pride corrupt your spirit. Change it. Change or deviate the course of your spirit, your disposition, and how you're seeing people around you. Because if you allow pride to take over, and that makes you impatient, and you become less compassionate, and now you can't relate with people. You can't see where they're at, and you can't put yourself in their shoes. You can't have empathy at that point. And if you can't do that, are you really representing Christ? Because Jesus was not impatient. If anything, he showed more patience than anyone else. Also, the least pride out of everyone. So he literally humbled himself to come here. And then he died for us. So when Solomon is saying that don't be quickly provoked in your spirit, we have to remember that if we're saved and we're believers in Christ, right? If we are believers in Christ, we shouldn't be quickly provoked in our spirit, because we should have a spirit living within us that is not our own, right? The Holy Spirit. And if we allow ourselves to get quickly provoked to anger, quickly provoked and throw us off our game, we're allowing something else to control us instead of the Holy Ghost to control us from within. And that's a problem. It's a problem in a lot of churches. It's a problem in a lot of pulpits. And it's a problem in a lot of Christians. And we have to be on guard for that. Verse 10, Solomon goes on saying, do not say, why were the old days better than these? I have heard everyone say that at one point or another. And it seems like every generation says the same thing. I've caught myself saying the same thing to my kids. Like, oh, no, these days are crazy. The days we're living in, they're crazy. It was so much better in, like, the good old days, right? And every generation says that. But we have a way of forgetting what it was actually like. We romanticize the past into something that it was never meant to be. And we forget the crappy bad stuff. And we emphasize the good, right? We start focusing on everything that's great. The problem with doing that is we lose touch with reality. We don't remember the reality of the way things actually were. No. We don't remember the problems that we faced every day. We only remember the highlights, right? Because that's how human memory works. We remember the highlights, or either that or the severely traumatic experiences. Those are the things that are like hard coded into your memory. As a result, we tend to romanticize what happened behind us and stop looking forward. And this is why when it says in the New Testament, like a man who puts his hands to the plow and looks back is not fit for the kingdom of God. This is why God is always moving forward. Life is moving forward. We should be moving forward. We shouldn't be focused on solely in the past and saying, oh, the past was so much better than this. Because Solomon says here that, for it is not wise to ask such questions. Why were the old days better than these? It's not even wise to ask that question, coming from the wisest man ever. He probably knows a thing or two. He says, wisdom, like an inheritance, is a good thing and benefits those who see the sun. So wisdom, like an inheritance, is a good thing. But wisdom, in verse 12, he says, wisdom is a shelter. Money's a shelter. It says money is a shelter or a defense. And wisdom is a shelter or a defense. So, a defense against what? And King Solomon knows, right? Because King Solomon literally broke one of the rules and amassed wealth. He knows what it's like to have money. He has a lot of it. He made Israel like the most powerful nation at the time. And he did it by amassing silver and gold. And why? And why was that like something David told him not to do? Because if you do that, then you'll start relying on the wealth and then your military might that your wealth can purchase instead of relying on God to protect your kingdom. So instead of your defense being God, now your defense is your money. Now he's saying money is a defense and wisdom is a defense. But he says it benefits those who see the sun. But the advantage of knowledge is this, that wisdom preserves the life of its possessor. Okay, we're two words coming up again, knowledge and wisdom, knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge, that's like knowing things, right? Facts. But wisdom's the application of that knowledge. And he's saying that the advantage to having all the knowledge in the world, right? All the knowledge you can possess, it's useless without wisdom. He says wisdom preserves the life of whoever possesses the knowledge. Because you can't just know things and do nothing with it. That doesn't help you. But if you know things and then apply these things, life changes. Verse 13, Solomon says, consider what God's done. Just consider what God has done. Who can straighten what he has made crooked? Now, this is not talking about like what's morally wrong and God's made something like unethical or evil, because God's not the author of evil. He's not the author of confusion. But he's saying there are going to be things that God has made crooked in your life. And you can't straighten them out, right? Because God did it that way. You're not stronger than he is. What kind of things do you think God made crooked in your life? And again, we're talking kind of this idea of a path, right? Walking a journey. And there's going to be portions of that path that kind of curve and weave and zigzag and detour and go around. And sometimes it gets a little sketchy, a little squirrely, and sometimes it gets crooked. And he's saying here, who can straighten out the crooked parts? Nobody, right? Because God has done it. And I don't think we realize that enough. The bad times as well as the good times, God has done them both. He literally built that into your path for a reason. And that's what we're going to dig into here in the next few verses that Solomon's going into. And he says in verse 14, when times are good, be happy. If you're having a good day, shut up and be happy. Enjoy that. And don't make it into something it's not. Don't try to make a good day into a bad day. Because there'll be plenty of other bad days. You don't need to make one up. When it's a good day, be happy. And he says in the next part of this verse 14, he says, but when times are bad, consider. When times are bad, consider. God has made the one as well as the other. God has made the one as well as the other. He made the good days as well as the bad days. And he made those for you. A lot of times we get into this habit of thinking like, if it's good, it came from Jesus. And if it's, bad, it came from the devil. That's not the truth. That's not true. That's not what Solomon is saying here either. He's saying he's the wisest person ever. I've experienced everything. And I have learned the good things come from God, and so do the bad. The bad days as well as the good. The twists and the turns in our life, the things that we think are bad, God's using those too. Job. Think about Job. Okay, the man went through, this would be like Jeff Bezos today. If he lost everything, like in a day, and just everything fell apart, loses all of his loved ones, except for his wife, and good wife or not, but ultimate traumatic experience, right? We have Job as that example. And everyone thinks, and they point to like, well, yeah, the devil, tested him and did this to him, did that to him, gave him sickness, took away his family, took away his wells, destroyed his farm. We forget that in the very beginning of that book, God asks Satan, what have you been doing? Going to and fro throughout the earth. And the very next part of that is God going, have you considered my servant Job? And it's not the first time, it's not the last time. He'll say it again. Have you considered my servant Job? Right? Because he's a righteous man. Literally, it was God's idea to put Job through what he went through. Because the whole point is to teach us something, to grow us, to learn and grow from it. And the other part of that, it was like you could say like, well, Job didn't really learn anything, right? What did he learn from that? He learned the mercy of God, the grace of God, and he exists as our example. Sometimes the things you go through aren't about you. They're about who comes after you, because they're going to need an example of what faith looks like under fire. It's not all roses and sunshine. So enjoy the good days. But this is why I believe it was Paul who said, like, don't think it's strange when fiery trials, come upon you, right? Like, it's not strange. This is life. Fiery trials exist to serve a purpose. They teach us things. They teach us patience. They teach us endurance, stamina, how to have a faith that's not easily extinguished. And Solomon's saying, at this point here, God has made the one as well as the other. Therefore, a man cannot discover anything about his future. We can try as we might. We can read horoscopes. We can check the stars. None of it will tell you anything about your future. Try as you might. A man cannot discover anything about his future. Only God can tell you what the future holds. And you're going to have to go through it to get there. You're going to have to go through the zigs and the zags and the twists and the turns, the good days and the bad, to get to the future God has prepared for you. In verse 15, Solomon says, in this meaningless life of mine, I have seen both of these two observations. A righteous man perishing in his righteousness. So a righteous man dies while being righteous, and a wicked man living long in his wickedness. So what's to be learned from that? Do evil and live longer? Maybe the fact that they're living longer is to give them more chance, more opportunity, right? We see this in the Old Testament. One of the kings who was told he was going to die was on his deathbed, prayed for additional time. God gave him 15 more years. He used those 15 more years to further go down the wrong path. So sometimes God provides more time as more opportunity to start coming to terms with who he is and build that relationship with him. Does it always work? No. People are they have free will. They're going to make their own choices. And each of us has to decide who we're going to serve. That's up to us, each individually. But he's saying, I have seen a righteous man die being righteous. I've seen wicked people live on and continue to be evil. But This is what he's learned from it. In verse 16, he said, don't be over righteous. Neither be over wise. Don't be overly righteous. Now, this idea in the Hebrew behind it is like self-righteousness, right? This conceited self-righteousness. He's like, don't be that guy that's just self-righteous. I never do anything wrong and I'm amazing. No, you're not. No, I haven't sinned since I got saved. You lied. You just did. So don't be over righteous. And don't be over wise. No one likes a know-it-all. Being overly wise. Okay, pause. Solomon's the one who's telling you not to be over wise. Don't be overly wise. He's the wisest man in the freaking world. And he's telling you don't be overly wise. Like, don't act like you know it all, because I don't know it all. And I am the wisest man ever. He says, why destroy yourself? Like, being overly righteous, being like self-absorbed, self-conceited, self-righteous. Why destroy yourself? Because that's all it'll do. It doesn't help the world. It doesn't do anything else. It simply destroys you. Because if you think that you are overly wise, you've made it to as far as you're going to go, you can't learn anything from that posture. So if you can't learn anything, you're destroying yourself. There's nothing else for you. You are killing yourself along the way. These are the people who think they know it all. These are the people that are going about their merry way, thinking they've already achieved success. They have nothing more to learn. And Solomon's saying, don't be like that, because that will destroy you. And in verse 17, he counters that and he says, well, do not be over wicked, and do not be a fool. Why die before your time? Again, so coming back to, well, don't go the other direction. Go, well, if righteousness is bad, I'm going to be evil and wicked. And he said, don't be overly wicked either. Yeah, I like how he says overly wicked, right? Don't be over wicked or overly evil, which implies that, well, you already are a little wicked, right? Each of us is. We're all sinners. So don't focus on solely the evil part, right? Keep that in check. That's what Solomon is saying. Like, don't get self-conceited. Recognize that you are evil and wicked yourself. And by recognizing that, you can actually keep it in check. Otherwise, he says, why die before your time? Why die? Don't be a fool. Don't be an idiot. So you don't want to be like a self-conceited super wise guy. But also don't be an idiot, right? Don't be a moron. There's no point in going about destroying yourself or dying before your time. And that's why I said that he separated the two. There's a difference between destroying yourself and actually dying before you need to. And that's what Solomon was saying. Why destroy yourself and have to live like that? Or why actually die before your time, before you needed to, before God intended for you to, because you can just end it too fast by doing stupid things. He said there's no need for that. It is good to grasp the one and not let go of the other. Grasp the one, have a grasp on what it means to be like righteous, and pursue after that. But also have a grasp on what it means to be wicked. He says the man who fears God will avoid all extremes. You're not going to go one way or the other. If you have a grasp on both, that'll keep you solidly planted in the middle of being focused on progressing forward, growing forward. You can't grasp onto righteousness, grasp onto wickedness, and then get pulled in either direction, right? But you have a check. You have them both in check. You have them both in hand. You're able to control them both. This desire to be righteous and wise, and this desire, the selfish desire to be, wicked and sinful and, pursue whatever is gratifying in the moment. He's saying, have them both in hand, grasp onto them both. Maintain the reality of where you're actually at. If you lose sight of one or the other, you either destroy yourself or die before your time. Constantly maintain a checks and balances of yourself, knowing where you're at, knowing what the devil on this shoulder, right, and the angel on the shoulder, that little metaphor. Yeah, grab them both and know where we're going. don't let one drive more than the other into the wrong direction, is what he's saying. Now, verse 19, he says, wisdom makes one wise man more powerful than 10 rulers of a city, or in a city. Wisdom makes one wise man more powerful than 10 rulers in a city. I have no idea how you would have 10 rulers in one city. That sounds like a nightmare. That sounds like the political, free-for-all. 10 rulers in one city sounds traumatic. And he says, wisdom's better than that. The idea is these 10 rulers, these mighty men, these warriors who can protect a city. Wisdom is better than having 10 of them. 10 super assassin ninjas. Not going to be as good as one man who actually has wisdom. If they all lack wisdom, it doesn't really matter, right? The decisions that they're going to make, not going to be in the best interest of the city. But wisdom makes one wise man better for that entire city. And Solomon proved this by being the wise man and then building up the entire nation of Israel. So he says in verse 20, there is not a righteous man on earth who does what is right and never sins. Again, don't be overly righteous. There's really no point, because there's nobody on earth who always does what's right and never sins. And for the people in the church pews who I have literally heard them say this, I don't sin. You literally just called Solomon a liar. You've literally, because throughout the entire Bible, there's many, many verses where there are none righteous, no, not one, right? We are all sinners. We all sin. And Solomon says, keep that in check. Do not let that control you. Don't let that determine your next steps. Let God order your steps. So I was doing some research a few years back, because I used to be so driven to accomplish goals and move up and do everything I could to constantly better myself in my financial position and my career. And it was all about goal achievement, right? And then it took me a lot of different struggles along the way to get to a point where I had got a new manager a couple of years back, and she had asked me, okay, what are your goals? Like, what do you want to do? What do you want to achieve? And I was like, this is going to sound really bad, but it's intentional. I have none. She's like, what? How can you not have any goals? Like, that's not a way to live. I was like, no, trust me. I have to keep it in check, because I am the kind of person that sets too many goals and pursues them blindly at whatever cost. And that destroys me, right? That damages relationships, that takes a toll on my family life, that it's not good. So I intentionally do not have goals at the moment. I am content. I'm learning in whatsoever state I am to be content. And that takes focus. And it reminded me of a story I was reading at the time, because I was trying to figure this out and doing research on it at the time on how can goals be bad, right? And I came across this, I don't know where I read it, but it has stuck with me ever since. And it was a guy asking a younger man during a job interview, to be a pastor. They're hiring a pastor for a church, and he had asked him, do you have goals? Do you have dreams? Do you have what do you envision? And he was like, yeah. He was going on, and he was like, okay. And would you describe yourself as driven or led? And the guy's like, I'm not quite sure I understand the question. And he's like, well, your motivations, would you consider that you're driven to achieve these? Or you're being led to achieve them? And the guy thought about it for a minute, and he's like, well, I've always said I'm driven. I'm a driven guy. I'm really motivated. I'm a go-getter. I'll go do what I need to do. And the older gentleman said, in my experience, I have learned that devils drive and God leads. And that stuck with me. And I had to start asking myself that question. Am I allowing myself to be led, or am I allowing myself to be driven? And this is what Solomon is pointing to here. There's not a righteous man on earth who does what is right all the time, right? And never sins. pay attention to what both sides of this nature, this, you have a sin nature and you've got this desire to be holy and righteous and upright. And he's saying have both of those in hand and grasp onto both of those. Keep them in check, maintain the reality of where you're at. And yeah, at times you're going to have to deviate from what's considered normal. And I don't have goals. I don't have any kind of no objective to achieve in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. I ran that race and it nearly killed me. I'm learning whatsoever state I'm in, just to be content doing that. And the satisfaction that I started to get out of life improved drastically. My blood pressure was going sky high, that started to come back down, start to get things back in control. Finding that kind of being centered again. And then verse 21, Solomon gives us a little bit more of advice here, saying, don't pay attention to every word people say. This is so true. Don't pay attention to every word people say. Or you might hear your servant cursing you, right? You're going to hear somebody saying something you did not want to hear, right? They're going to be talking bad about you. Well, Solomon's got a point, because he says, for you know in your heart that many times you yourself have cursed others, right? You've talked bad about other people too. So if you do it, other people probably do that too. And if you do it about them, people are going to do that, and it might be about you. So don't listen too closely to what people say. Don't pay attention to every word. And if you do hear something, don't pay attention to it. Don't pay attention to every word. People say things when they're frustrated. That's fine. They might be having a bad day. Don't pay too close of attention to it and hold it against them, because you've done the same. And he says, all this I tested by wisdom. I've tested it. I've proved this by wisdom. And I said, I am determined to be wise. But this was beyond me. Whatever wisdom may be, it is far off and most profound. Who can discover it? Well, if the wisest man who ever lived couldn't discover what, true wisdom, the true understanding of things, how things work, the reason behind things, if he couldn't figure it out, who can discover it? So I turned my mind to understand, to investigate, and to search out wisdom in the scheme of things. So he's giving us his story. I turned my mind to understand, to investigate, to search out wisdom in the scheme of things, and to understand the stupidity of wickedness and the madness of folly. We started this book mentioning these four, right? Righteousness, wickedness, madness, folly. Now he set out to understand it all. And the only way to truly understand it is to experience it. So to grab life by the horns and do something stupid, right? That was Solomon's approach. I'm going to do it all. Anything I want to do, every experience I can possibly have. Every experience. Even the bad ones, right? Because how do you know unless you've experienced it? So he let himself do everything. He was literally trying to find answers to what, the meaning of life and the purpose of life without God, and trying to understand, is it possible to have a meaningful life without God? And he literally was granted a gift by God and still chose to try to find a fulfilling life without God in the picture. So as a man of science, which he was, like I've said this many times before, we still refer back to a lot of the scientific discoveries and the way that he organized things. We still use that and rely on his work today. He's not some mythical character. This guy was a real scientist and preacher and king. And even he's saying, I tried everything. I turned my mind to understand. Now, he said he couldn't discover it, right? Who can discover it? Wisdom, whatever wisdom may be, it's far off, most profound. He couldn't figure it out. But we get a clue as to probably why. Because he says, I turned my mind to investigate. Now, who can straighten what God made crooked, right? These things that are very difficult to understand, these crooked concepts where it seems like there's too many variables and everything's interconnected. To understand all of creation, is very difficult to simply straighten that out into a straight line and understand it from A to B. Very difficult. Who can do it? Not the wisest man who ever lived, because he said, I turned my mind to investigate. What he really is pointing to is you can't come to these conclusions. You can't come to understand wisdom with your mind, but your heart. It's your heart that you have to use. And if anyone would just simply use, this is what we refer to as like that heart knowledge of God versus just simply a head knowledge of God, then you get to understand all of creation as far as how did everything come into existence. This is what I struggled with immensely in my early Christian walk, and I will say early, but not really. I got saved when I was 17. Didn't start acting like it until I was 27. But it took me 4 years of solid study and trying to rip Genesis. It was freaking Genesis. Again, I'm a trained neurobiologist. I'm a scientist. I'm okay believing the Bible, the New Testament, and everything, but the Genesis account? Pfft. No, come on. 6 literal days? What? No, fossils. We got fossils. How are you explaining all? It took me 4 years. Because I finally got to the point where I was so torn up in my faith, in my understanding, the difference between my heart and my head, that it was affecting every aspect of my faith. And I got to the point of, I'm going to destroy, I'm going to tear apart once and for all the accounts in Genesis. I need to, for myself. Paul said, let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. So I need to be fully persuaded. In order for me to be fully persuaded, I need to either rip it apart or I need to prove that it's true. Should be no big deal, right? Just the entire account of Genesis. Yeah, 4 years. I went on this 4-year streak of getting everything I can get my hands on, studying it, going through the original Hebrew, trying to learn and understand what it's freaking saying in Genesis. And I get to the conclusion at the end of 4 years, I can't prove it wrong. I can't. What I did achieve in those 4 years was I had learned a lot about how much of the scientific aspect of things we lie about in academia. Evolutionary theory, things of these. There's no evidence to support it. They're lying to you. The so-called evidence they think that exists to support like the Big Bang Theory and millions and millions of years or billions of years of evolutionary theory, it can literally fit in a shoebox. It used to be a bigger box, and we'd find a new discovery and we'd put those in that box, right? And this is the box. The box is getting bigger to prove Darwin. And then as we got scientific advancements and we could test this stuff better, things started coming out of the box. Like, oh, that's not a Jurassic Park tooth, that's a pig tooth. It's not the little velociraptor claw we thought it was. It's a chicken claw. And that's why I was in the field on top. So things start coming out of this box, and now there's like nothing in it. The whole thing's it's a house of cards. The whole thing falls apart. However, going through Genesis from a scientific perspective, which I didn't think was even something you could potentially do until I started doing it, there is more scientific evidence for the creation account that's recorded in Genesis than there is for the creation account that's recorded in textbooks today. And people think I'm crazy when I say that. And it's difficult to explain because, like I said, it took 4 years of digging and understanding and researching and hyperfixating on this one topic. But at the end of 4 years, I got to the point of you cannot convince me the Genesis account's wrong by any means. You just can't. I'll have these discussions and these debates with people when they bring up certain things, and I just start asking them questions, the questions I had, right? And I know you don't have the answers to these questions because it took me years to come to a conclusion on answering a lot of these questions about Genesis. But to make people pause and think, it's not easy to do in today's society. Once I came to the conclusions that I'd come to, that not only is Genesis correct as written, it's necessary. Without the proper understanding of Genesis, the rest of the Bible is pointless. The rest of it doesn't make sense. The rest of it is unnecessary. So don't discount Genesis. It is literally, to me, it's the most important book. For 10 chapters, most important book. Don't just go, oh, it's that's the book, well, so-and-so begat so-and-so begat so-and-so, and then stop reading. It all exists for a reason. I mean, there's so much to it. I mean, the begat so-and-so, begat so-and-so, begat so-and-so, and they lived for this many years, this many years, this many years, this many years. Yeah, that even follows like an exponential, radiation curve, which you would expect to see with the breakdown of the flood and everything. There's so much to it. I would love, maybe I'll do a series on this because this is something I'm so passionate about, and nobody really digs in and nobody really talks about the scientific validity to Genesis. But anyway, I don't even know where I was at now. Let me find out.
Lost. Lost.
Head knowledge and heart knowledge. That's what it was about. Okay. Hey, man, some planes take off and don't land here. So he said that I find in verse 26, back on track, Pastor. Okay. Verse 26, he says, I find more bitter than death the woman who is a snare, whose heart is a trap, and whose hands are chains. Oh, Solomon. Sexist. What are you doing, bro? How many wives did this man have? 700. How many concubines did this man have? 300. Man's got 1,000 women in a harem. And he says, I find more bitter than death is the woman whose heart is a snare, a trap, her hands are chains. She solely exists to trap you and pull you down. The man who pleases God will escape her, but the sinner she will ensnare. Oh, good. So, no. What did he just say? The man who pleases God will escape her, but the sinner she will ensnare. But if you literally go right back up to verse 20, he says, there is not a righteous man on earth who does what is right and never sins. She'll ensnare every single one of us. This type of woman is more bitter than death. Why? And this is where Solomon, again, remember, Solomon's preaching from his experience. He's got 1,000 women in a harem, right? 700 wives, 300 concubines. He's preaching from his experience. And he says that woman is more bitter than death. Because what happened in Solomon's life? Do you remember the story of Solomon? Like, you go through, I think it's 1 Kings or 2 Kings, when it's giving the account of Solomon, his many, many wives. And towards the end of his life, he allowed these foreign wives. This is why David said, don't allow yourself to have foreign wives or many wives, right? Don't multiply wives. He allowed them to take him and turn him away from his God. And there's records and recorded accounts in the Bible of Solomon sacrificing to Moloch and participating in these pagan idols worship services. And this woman was a trap and a snare, and her hands were chains because she was able to take a hold of the wisest man who ever lived and lead him away from his God. That is worse than death, because now you're living without God in the picture. And Solomon says that's worse than dying. The worst thing you can experience in this life is not death. It's life without Jesus. It's life without God. Because then all the suffering has no point. There's no one to help you through any of that struggle. There's no one to put your faith and trust in that it's all going to work out. He says it's worse than death. And in his experience, that came from a woman whose heart was a trap and hands were chains. Now, in verse 27, he says, "Look," says the teacher, "this is what I've discovered. Adding one thing to another to discover the scheme of things. While I was still searching, but not finding," right? Still trying to figure out the scheme of things, the reasoning behind everything. Still searching, still struggling to try to find the answer. He says, "I found one upright man among 1,000. One upright, right? Like wise man." It literally, the literal translation of this word upright, it means wise. He says, "I found one wise man among 1,000, but not one upright woman among them all. This only have I found. God made mankind upright, but men have gone in search of many schemes." In other words, we're the ones who screwed it up. We messed it up. God made us correctly. We were upright, and we screwed that up. But he's saying here, "I found one upright man among 1,000, but not one upright woman among them all." This wise man that he's talking about is himself. There's a reason why he's talking about one upright man among 1,000. It's not among 1,000 men. It's among this 1,000 women, these 700 wives and 300 concubines. It's literally 1,000 women. And he's saying, I was looking for one, and I couldn't find one of meaning, one that was upright. Now, I find it interesting, and if literally, Ecclesiastes immediately follows the book of Proverbs. And if you flip back just a few pages here, go to the last chapter of Proverbs is Proverbs 31. Proverbs 31, and if you start in verse 10, it says, "A wife of noble character who can find? She is worth far more than rubies." Other translations will say a wife of valor, an upright woman. This is something that Solomon knew full well. You can have many relationships. You can have many, we'll say, interactions with the opposite sex. But that does not mean it'll fulfill you. You're not going to find meaning there. Even among 1,000, you're not necessarily going to find meaning there. And Solomon is saying, this is what I've found. God made us perfect and we screwed it up. That's what I've learned. The most wisest man who ever lived went on this lifelong journey of trying to discover the meaning of things and understanding. And, well, what did you learn, King Solomon, with all your wisdom and knowledge? We screwed it up. That's what I've learned. A life without God is not a life worth living. It's worse than death. And in all of these experiences, the one key thing he came back to that would have made it a little bit more meaningful, this meaningless life of his, was if he were to find a wife of valor, an upright woman, a wise woman, a Proverbs 31 woman. So if you have a woman like that in your life, don't let her go. Doesn't matter if you go through 1,000 others, you're not going to find another one. Her price is far above rubies, right? She's worth more than rubies. Like, money cannot purchase this. Why? Solomon knows this. He's got more money than anyone else. And he has literally purchased them and married into them and made alliances and brought the world together in different alliances through these marriages and found no meaning. So if you have a marriage in which you are finding meaning, you protect that at all costs. Because that's the only thing that gives this life meaning outside of your relationship with Christ. And having that relationship with God is the only thing that's going to get you through the tough times. Now, is it a bad thing to have a bad day? No. That's what we were questioning in the very beginning, right? This is the title of this message, Have a Bad Day. Why? Why did I say have a bad day? This is a quote. I'm a man of quotes. I love living by quotes. I heard this quote years ago, and it drastically impacted my life and how I view tough times. And it was, anyone can hold the helm when the sea is calm. Right? But it's in the storm, when the waves are raging and the lightning's flashing and the thunder's crashing, that we learn who we are and we learn the skills to navigate the next one. Have a bad day and make it a character building one. I love you guys. I'll talk to you next week. I'll see you. And if you're new here, like, subscribe, click notification bell thingy or whatever it is. Appreciate it. If you found value in this at all, hit the thumbs up. I appreciate that. Drop me a comment and let me know where you're from and how I helped you, or how I can help dig into some questions you have in the future. Have a great week.